arrow next to it. I'd like to invite you all to click that little arrow and switch that to all panelists and attendees. What that will allow you to do is every message you send will then be viewable by everyone in the webinar. This is really helpful because this is how we'll be taking questions. You can see what other questions your colleagues have. You're also free to chat with each other, to offer advice, and share your perspective. So I'm going to invite everyone to go ahead and switch that right now and introduce themselves to the group here today. Once again, you can do that by in that chat box. If you look where it says to, right next to that to, T-O, you should see a button almost that says all panelists, and switch that, click the arrow there to switch that to all panelists and attendees, and then you can go ahead and chat with the whole group. Let's see who's interested in doing that. Okay, great to see some of those responses come in. I see some familiar names as well. That's fantastic. Glad to see that we've had a few of you along for our whole series of webinars. That is how you will ask questions here today, as I mentioned. Just one quick note on that. There may be some questions that are really, really specific to one organization or one set of circumstances. And when that's the case, we'll actually refer you to an email box that we will talk about in just a little bit. My name is Brian. I don't know if I shared that yet. And I am also joined by my colleague, Courtney. Courtney, do you want to go ahead and say hello?
Hello, everyone.
All right. Hello, Courtney. We will be hearing from her in just a little bit. Those of you who have been to some of our earlier webinars will recognize how we like to get things started off by just checking in and seeing who is with us here today. And we'll do that through a few quick polls. So go ahead and let us know if you have had a federal grant before. If you have not had a federal grant, as I've said before, I think that this is actually a great opportunity to get started working with the federal government, but it's always good to see who's got some of that experience. Today's session will be talking about the electronic grants management system we call eGrants, and that is unique to our federal agency, the Corporation for National and Community Service. So this is one of those instances where actually this won't have a whole lot of bearing on our discussion here today. So those of you who clicked no, it looks like 3 of you clicked no. Congratulations, you're starting on an equal footing with everybody else in our webinar here today. All right, we've got just a couple more of these. Let's see how well you know Senior Corps. Senior Corps is the set of programs managed by the Corporation for National Community Service, united by the idea of engaging individuals 55 and older in service to their community. 55 and older in service to their community. There are 3 Senior Corps programs, the Foster Grandparent and Senior Companion programs, which are available for your applications right now, and then a third program called RSVP that actually was available a little bit earlier this year and will be available again next year, but those applications are not open right now. Let's go ahead and share our results, and we've got a pretty good distribution here. Those of you who are Senior Corps grantees, this material today will probably be pretty familiar to you because we are using eGrants. The whole purpose of today's webinar is to walk through eGrants. So some of these screens will likely look familiar to you, but you're always welcome to get a little refresher. Maybe we'll cover something that you haven't thought of before. And again, for those of you who are new, this is perfect for you because this is all about that specific piece of software. One last question here. Like I said, I saw some familiar names in the chat box, but let's get a little bit more of a head count. How many of you have joined us for a webinar already this cycle? Give that just one more minute to give people a chance to respond. All right, let's see what we've got here. It looks like most of you have been with us for at least one of our sessions earlier. If you are new to this, that is fantastic. Let's actually just jump ahead a little bit to show you the different resources that we have had available. This is the fourth of four webinars for this competition. You can see the topics that we covered before on the screen right now. All of these sessions were recorded, and we will be sharing the recordings likely next week. You can find them on the competition webpage. That is the URL you see up to the top right of the screen up here. All of the information about this competition you can find on that webpage. We'll be visiting it later, and we'll be referring to it a whole heck of a lot during the course of this webinar. Again, as those of you who've attended our earlier webinars will know. Down here at the bottom of the screen, you will find that mailbox that I alluded to, where you can send any questions that we're not able to address here today. Get your questions in soon. As the competition deadline approaches, you don't want to be sending in a question, a few days, a week before that deadline closes. There are humans on the other end of that, right? Real people who need to answer those questions. They don't have unlimited capacity. So the time to get your questions in is sooner rather than later. That's going to be a theme as we go through our content here today. Here's what we'll be doing. We are going to go through some competition basics. So for those of you who are brand new, those of you for whom this is the first session, we'll just make sure you've got some of the same basic information everybody else has already gotten. For those of you who've attended an earlier webinar, this will be a little bit of a review, but guess what? That means that information is super duper important. Then we'll really dive into the content here today. We're going to walk through our electronic grants management system basically step by step, and we're going to give you some tips on how to navigate that process. It is a piece of software, like any piece of software. It's got a few nuances to it, a few things to be aware of, and we're going to walk through those today. So with that, let me hand it over to Courtney to go through some of our competition basics.
Thanks, Brian. So our competition that we have open right now is for the foster grandparent and senior companion programs. We are accepting applications now, which means you are able to submit an application in eGrants today up until our application deadline, which is 5 p.m. on December 6th. For this competition, we are looking to replace some programs that have recently closed, and so we have some limited geographic areas that are available for funding, and that information can be found on our Appendix A, which will give you a preview of in a couple slides here. Just a note that all of the information about competition and directions and all the wonderful, lovely things you might need to know are posted on our competition website, which Brian has pasted into the chat and is also the link at the bottom of the screen there on this slide. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, there are some limited opportunities in geographic areas where these opportunities are available. The map that you all are seeing right now is showing you where those programs, where that funding is open. So the blue states have some funding available in very specific areas for foster grandparent. The orange or red looking states have some areas available only for senior companion. And then those states that are in green have some availability for both programs. And all of that information about exactly where those locations that are available for funding are can be found on Appendix A. So both senior companion and foster grandparent have their own individual Appendix A's. And on Appendix A, you can see the state in which the funding is available, the total amount of funding available that CNCS would then give your agency to help run the program, our anticipated start date for these programs, the volunteer service years, which we talked about quite a bit this week, and I don't think we'll get into very much in this presentation, but this is basically the minimum number of volunteer service hours that you would need to have based on the funding level. And Brian, please correct me if I misspoke there. And then the areas affected are going to be the specific counties and areas within these states that we have funding available to run programming in.
Courtney, you got that exactly right. It is a measure of stipended hours, but we will actually be coming back to that and talking about it a little bit here today. It is inescapable. I just want to emphasize one thing that Courtney did already say, but it's a frequent question that we get, so I just want to make sure it's super clear. And that is that when you're looking at this map, right, we color-coded the states to let you know what states have competitions available, but what's available for competition is not the whole state. It's going to be a particular portion of the state. So, for example, a little corner here of Missouri as an example, or a little corner here of Wyoming. I'm just making up where those little spaces are, so don't take that as a geographic reality. But the key is it is these regions within the states that are actually up for competition right now. This is a screenshot of the Senior Companion Appendix A, but again, as Courtney already alluded to, there is a foster grandparent program Appendix A that is totally different, right? There's some overlap in terms of states, but even when there's overlap in terms of states, it doesn't even mean that they'll be the same geographic area. So please go to our competition website, links in the chat box right now, and take a look at Appendix A to see what is available for you. If you do want some more information about this volunteer service year measure, like I said, we're going to come back to that a little bit later. So this is a screenshot from that competition website. And the reason why I want to pull this up here is because I want to let you know that basically everything I am about to say, and in fact, actually much more than I'm about to say, much more than I could communicate, than we could communicate in an hour-long webinar, is available in the documents that have those big red arrows next to them. Those documents are the basis of this information, right? We're going to walk through this electronic grants management system, the required system to submit your application step by step, but guess what? Those documents do that too. They've got screenshots, instructions, definitions of the different fields that you'll be filling in. So very often throughout the course of the webinar here today, you will hear me refer you to these specific documents for more information. So I want to highlight those. And again, you can get those at the URL that is in the chat box right now. Now, before we dive into the actual eGrants system, I am going to offer some key tools and tips. Before I offer those tools and tips, because we've got about 27 attendees here, and I know a good portion of you have attended some of our earlier webinars, I'm going to invite those of you who have attended our earlier webinars. Have you heard me offer any tips about submitting your application in eGrants before? And if you have, can you go ahead and share those in the chat box? What tips, and if you actually, I know we've also got some current Senior Corps grantees here, so if you just have your own tips, you can go ahead and share them too. So use that chat box, make sure it's turned to all panelists and attendees, and let us know if you have heard me share any tips throughout our earlier webinars about using our electronic grants management system, or just if you have any of your own tips from your own experience with that system. Go ahead and put them in the chat box there. Okay, I see Beverly is first. She says, don't wait until the last minute. Couldn't have said it better myself, Beverly. Do not wait until the application deadline. That's probably number one. But there are some others. Does anybody have any others? All right, we got a shy group here today. So let me share some of our key tips, and I'll reemphasize these at various times throughout the webinar. So draft your application in a word processing program such as Microsoft Word or Google Docs, and copy and paste it in our electronic grants management system. eGrants is not a word processing program, right? It is not made for editing, for track changes, for moving things around. It can do some element of that in the text box. You've got some tools, but not nearly the kinds of drafting tools you're going to want for an application like this. So don't write your application in eGrants. Write it outside of the system in a word processing program, and then copy and paste it into eGrants when you are ready. As Beverly already told us, prepare to submit your application well in advance of the application deadline. We recommend 10 business days. So that would be about 2 full weeks. I think we've still got time, right, Courtney, until December 6th? I don't think we're within 10 business days yet. So you've still got time to meet our recommended benchmark. It is, of course, recommended. You've got until 5 p.m. on December 6th to submit your application, but under no circumstances should you be waiting until then, or even until that last day, to be honest with you, even that last week to submit your application. Get it in early. Use your work plan development worksheets to draft out your work plans. If you don't know what a work plan is, it's a particular part of the application. We talked about it quite a bit in each of our last 2 webinars that you're going to use to kind of tell us the story of your service. You'll tell us what your volunteers will be doing, the community need you expect them to address, and the outputs and outcomes that will result from that. Just like the rest of the application, you don't want to be building them in eGrants. As we'll see when we go into the system, the way you make that part of the application is it really is kind of constructed. It's almost like a table that you're building within the eGrants system, and that's got some advantages. The advantages are it makes it kind of error-proof, but it's got some disadvantages. And the disadvantages are it makes it really tough to experiment, to try one way and decide, I don't like that, let me try a different way, and to get things wrong. So just like the whole application, you're going to want to basically know what you want to put in before you even get to eGrants. We do have a page limit. That page limit is 15 pages as the application prints out from eGrants. So this is another good reminder about why it's important to start early, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to draft your whole application. You put it into eGrants, our system, and then you print it out and it's 20 pages instead of 15, because guess what? CNCS won't review any information above 15 pages. So you need to put it into the system and print it out and review it to make sure that it meets the page limit. Finally, if you have any technical difficulties, there is a service available to you called the National Service Hotline. You can contact them via phone or email, and their contact information is in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's a very important document. It's kind of our equivalent to a request for applications or request for proposals. And who can tell me where they might find that? Who can tell me where they can find the Notice of Funding Opportunity in the chat box? Can anyone tell me where they can find the Notice of Funding Opportunity in the chat box? Not seeing anything come in yet. Courtney, where can we find the Notice of Funding Opportunity?
The Notice of Funding Opportunity is on the competition website.
Thank you. Maddie chimed in. Looks like she sent this just to us. The competition website, that's that URL that I pasted in a little bit earlier. That's got the contact information for our National Service Hotline that can help you with any technical difficulties you might run into. Again, this is another reason why it's really important not to wait. They might be busy at 4:59 p.m. on December 6th, right? They're not unlimited either, so you don't want to be contacting them for the first time if you need any help at 4:59 p.m. on December 6th, right? You want to be well in advance of that. You want to be well in advance of that. So don't wait for the deadline to reach out to them, just like you shouldn't be waiting for the deadline to submit your application. So those are some big picture tips, and we're going to kind of re-emphasize them as we go through the system. But let's start with that process. Today's webinar is going to be a little bit different than the other webinars. It's going to be a little bit more just talking here, because we're really going to try to give you a guided tour of the electronic grants management system. And as you can see here, you need a username and password to get started. Now, we're not actually going to show you how to register for one of those. That's outside the scope of the webinar. We've got limited time, so I really need to focus on certain things. But you can find information to do that in those resources I pointed out earlier, these resources right there, which are available on the competition website. They'll give you step-by-step instructions about how to create a username and password. One step that is often missed until near the end of the process is that your application must be submitted by someone who is authorized to do so, someone who's authorized to bound your organization contractually. It's a term we call the authorized representative. Very often that's going to be someone at like an executive director level, right? Pretty high up, someone at a leadership level. They're going to need to have their own unique eGrants credentials. Don't just mention this to them again at 4:59 p.m. on December 6th. Let them know that now start to create their access, because they're going to need that access to submit the application. Like I said, we're not going to go through that step by step. There are instructions for that in those grant application instructions. When you get in, you're going to see something that looks like this. As you can see, there's more available than just submitting an application. As I already mentioned, this is actually what our grantees use to manage their grants on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot more tools here than just submitting an application. You're going to want to click that New button right? That's how you're going to start an application. Once you have done that, by the way, once you started drafting your application, you're not going to go back to new again. Instead, you'll see something new pop up over here that lets you know how to continue your application. But for all of you, when you're getting started for the first time, you're going to click that new button, and then it's going to say select a NOFA. A NOFA is slightly different than a NOFO. We already talked about the Notice of Funding Opportunity for reasons I'm not going to get into because it's not important. We have a slightly different acronym in the system. Don't worry about that. All you need to know is how to navigate to the application you are looking for, which means you're going to click on Senior Corps because this is a Senior Corps competition, right, down here. And then what's going to come up after that is a choice of several different Notice of Funding opportunities, several different competitions that are open right now. And depending on what you're interested in, you're either going to choose FGP or SCP. You can submit applications for both, but they need to be separate applications. You need to submit a separate application for each competition, but you can submit applications for both. They're totally separate processes, but you can do that. And that's going to pop up in a drop-down menu after you select Senior Corps here. What that does is it kind of pulls in the structure of the application that you're going to fill out. It pulls it in so you're working within the line, so to speak, of what we're looking for. The first page you will see will look like this. There will actually be some information here where you see blanks in the middle of the screen because that is going to be populated by the Notice of Funding opportunity that you choose. This is just a sample, so it's blank. Up here to the left, you'll see an outline of all the information that you'll need to provide. So this is essentially a summary of everything that you're going to fill out. But before you get started, you actually need to focus down here where it says create a new, the way that the system works is that there's a little toolbar in front of me right where I'm trying to point here where it says create a new project. First-time applicants use the create a new project link to enter information about your organization. So you guys are all going to do that. You're going to click on create a new project, and that's going to ask you certain information about your, I already pointed out the outline, then you click create a new project. It's going to take you to a screen like this. It's going to ask you certain information about your project, about what you have planned, We're not going to go through all of the fields there. If you want more information about that, again, it's in that grant application instructions. But one thing that I do want to highlight is this area is affected by the project right here. This should match what's in Appendix A. And that helps us make sure we can identify what you are applying for, right? You don't want to be caught with us not being able to determine exactly what you are applying for because you use different language. So this should match what is in Appendix A, those service areas that Courtney pointed out to us earlier. But you're going to provide some information about your project and then save that. And then you'll come back here to get started on the application proper. This is really where the application itself gets started. And it gets started with a narrative section. You can see the outline for that narrative section on the screen right now. This is the information we'll be asking for. There are actually a couple of sections here you won't need to provide, and those are the two down there at the bottom. Other and P&S amendment, not relevant for this. You don't need to put any information in there. As you can see on the screen right now, the Notice of Funding opportunity contains some information as well as the criteria that we'll use to review each of those narrative sections. So that's a really, really helpful resource. You're going to want to use those evaluation criteria in drafting your application because that's what we will use to evaluate your grant applications. So it's an open book test, right? We're trying to tell you what we'll use to make our decisions. So use that when you're drafting these narratives. Next, we're going to move to the work plan. And this is the part of the application that I mentioned before that is kind of constructed rather than written. And we'll see what that looks like. When you first enter the work plan area, this is what you will see. There's not going to be much there. And to get started, you're going to need to click Begin. Once you do that, you're going to have a drop-down menu of focus areas. Now, this is one area where our applicants for the FGP program are going to see something a little bit different than our applicants for the FGP program. For our, I think I said FGP twice there, sorry, where our FGP program, the Foster Grandparent Program, is going to differ from the Senior Companion Program. Our SCP program is what I meant. Our Senior Companion applicants are actually only going to see Healthy Futures. That's all they're going to see. So this is a sample from the foster grandparent program we're looking at right here. But the senior companion program is only going to see healthy futures. And that's because these are the focus areas, which are categories of performance measures that are available to each program. When you click on these arrows, they're actually drop-down menus, and what's going to appear are objectives. If these words that I'm saying, focus areas and objectives, don't mean anything to you, I recommend you go back and you listen to our last two webinars, depending on the program you're interested in. One was about the Senior Companion Program, one was about the Foster Grandparent Program, and we talked a little bit more about performance measurement. And there's also a resource called Appendix B on the competition website. And when we're done with the walkthrough, I'm going to go to the competition website and kind of show you all these different resources so you can see what I'm talking about. But that's going to help you understand the content of these different performance areas. The key thing to know here, though, is that the choices you make on this screen will affect the choices you make later on. And that's actually true throughout the performance measurement part of our electronic grants management system. In some ways, it's very smart and it's error-proof in that, again, if you make a decision at one stage, it's going to take what you put in and kind of carry that through. That's great. It makes it error-proof in some ways, but it can be challenging because it does mean you need to know what you're putting in at the very beginning, because if not, it can be tricky to go back and fix it. You can, of course, go back and fix it. You're not going to be stuck. You're not, totally out of luck if you don't get it right the first time. It's just a little more complicated. And that's why we encourage you to use our worksheets to plot out this area of your application before you ever get to this point. So you're going to choose your focus areas. And again, if you're in a senior companion program, your choice is only going to be healthy futures here. Oh, I apologize, healthy futures and other community priorities. And then that's going to take you to a screen that looks like this. It's got a series of drop-down menus. And at first, there'll be no information up here up top. As you fill out some of these screens down here, you'll start to see those populate up top. Right? So what you'll do is you'll fill out all of these areas, and then you'll click this Add PM button down here to the bottom right, and that will take what you put in here and make it appear up top. As you can see, certain things are grayed out, and they're going to be grayed out until you put in the information that's required above it. It's like a waterfall. The information you put in each step opens up the new possibilities for you to put in what's below it, and that's because it's based on what you're choosing. This is, again, on a foster grandparent program example, so you'll see different things here for our senior companion grantees, right? Obviously, you're not going to see an objective about school readiness in that program because that's not what it's about. The most important piece of advice I can give to you about this screen is that the size of the text boxes does not convey any information about how much you should write there. You should not look at this and say, all right, enter community need. That's a pretty big text box. Enter instrument description. That's a smaller text box. Therefore, I should write a lot up here and a little down here. That is not the right way to think about it. That is not the right way to think about it. That is just an artifact of the technology. In order to know what a complete answer is for these, you're going to want to look at our grant application instructions again. Remember, that's the document that I said has some definitions that'll tell you what we're looking for when we ask enter community need. It'll tell you what is a complete community need description, and that's what you want to use. Don't just go by whether boxes are big or small, because that's not relevant. But you'll fill out the information requested here, and then you'll click Add PM, and they'll start to populate up here. You can see an example here where we've added one. So I filled out one set of these little drop-down menus, and you can see it appeared up top here. When you're all done adding your performance measures, you'll click Next. And it'll take you to a screen that looks like this. This is the first screen where that VSY term, that volunteer service year term that Courtney mentioned, really becomes relevant. Can anyone tell me in the chat box where I will write volunteer service years, where I will write a number of volunteer service years on this screen? It's something that I mentioned in one of our earlier webinars. Does anyone know? Where will you put volunteer service years on this screen? Okay, no takers. So this is very, very important. Due to a quirk of the system, due to just the way the technology was built, where it says up top there, my project's total number of unduplicated volunteers is, in this case so far, 0, you're going to put the total number of volunteer service years in this box. For the purpose of submitting your application in eGrants, we are asking you to assume that unduplicated volunteers and volunteer service years are equivalent. Only for the purposes of submitting your application in eGrants. We know that they're not necessarily going to be the same thing. Those of you who've attended our earlier webinars will know that a volunteer service year is 1,044 hours of service. Most of you, if not all of you, will likely have some volunteers who serve more than that, some volunteers who serve less than that. There is no requirement that the average amount of service be 1,044 hours. It's just a tool that we use to help us count hours. But for the purposes of the electronic grants management system, for the purposes of your application, when you see my project's total number of unduplicated volunteers is, you're going to put the total number of volunteer service years you propose to provide in your application in this box right here. That amount is the amount that cannot be less than what you see in Appendix A. I'm going to go back to our screenshot of Appendix A. The number that you put in that box cannot be less than this number for the application, or sorry, for the service area where you're applying for. So if you're applying for Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, actually the county I grew up in, I was born in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Shout out to Norristown. If you're applying for this opportunity, you cannot include less than 33 in that space. And that means you're committing to provide at least 33 volunteer service years worth of service. One volunteer service year, again, is equal to 1,044 hours. So let's just take this one step farther. Let's take this one step farther. Can anybody tell me how many hours worth, stipended hours, I should say, stipended hours of service is associated with this opportunity, this 33? How many hours worth of service, stipended hours worth of service, does this 33 contain? If one volunteer service year equals 1,044 hours. Who's got their calculator handy? Okay, it looks like Karen is first, followed by Scott. The way you get that answer is you take 33 and you multiply it by 1,044, and the answer is 34,452. 34,452. So that's the total number of hours here. That's what this means. But the key thing that I want to emphasize right now, to jump back to where we were, is if I'm applying for that Montgomery County, Pennsylvania opportunity that we just looked at, who can tell me what number I'm going to put in this box right here? At minimum, you can go above, but the lowest possible number you could put in this box right here. All right, I see Karen's answer. Anyone else want to venture? I think we've probably narrowed it down to at least two numbers, but let's see if we can zero in on the right one. All right, I see Clementine also. She sent that just to us. 33, right? So if I'm applying for that Montgomery County, Pennsylvania opportunity, 33 hours worth of service is the minimum number I can put there. Again, I want to stress this. That doesn't actually mean, I know this is very counterintuitive, it's just the technology we've got. That doesn't actually mean that you're committing to provide 33 unduplicated volunteers. We're just asking you to assume that they're equivalent for these purposes. So the number of hours is important. Those VSYs, those stipended hours, that's important because that's what's tied to Appendix A. That's going to drive your budget in a way that we'll look at in just a minute. But it doesn't have to actually be the number of unduplicated volunteers you intend to put there. All right. I think we've talked that one through. So you're going to put that number, the number of volunteer service years you intend to provide there, no less than what's in Appendix A. And once you put that number there, then you'll start to be able to fill out these fields down at the bottom. Your output target, your outcome target, right? Those relate to your number of beneficiaries and the number that you think will experience some change based on your performance measures, and the number of unduplicated volunteers. As is true up here, down here, you're going to assume that those are equal to 1 VSY. And when you add up all these rows, that's got to equal the number that's up here. So what I put here plus what I put here plus what I put here has got to equal 25. Some of you who attended our earlier webinars will also remember this rule that we say you must measure the performance. And what that really means is you must have outputs and outcomes for a certain number of volunteer service years. And it's the same number as are in Appendix A. So if I'm in my Montgomery County, Pennsylvania example, these two rows where I've got outputs and outcomes are going to need to add up to 33. If I'm proposing to bring 34 volunteer service years worth of service, I could put that extra VSY down here in this other category, which I don't have to measure. So let's do an example with what we see on the screen right now. Let's say that this applicant who is proposing, it looks like, to bring 25 volunteer service years worth of service to the project, is applying for an opportunity where Appendix A says 20. 20 is the required number of VSYs. What is the number of VSYs that I would expect to see when I add these two fields up together? When I add these two fields together, what's the number I should see if this applicant is applying for an opportunity where the minimum number of VSYs is 20? When I add these two fields up together, the minimum number of VSYs in Appendix A is 20. What's the number I would see when I add these two fields up together? Just these two. Okay, I think I've stumped you. It's 20, right? It's 20. And you can tell that because they've got the outputs and the outcomes. Okay, Clementine got that in there. Yeah, 20, because it's got the outputs and outcomes. So if that's what's in Appendix A, that's what has to go here. Now, this applicant in this scenario is proposing more than that. They're proposing 25. And so those 5, they could put down here. These are all minimums, by the way. So they could choose to put 1 down here and have the rest here alongside their other 20, or they could actually eliminate this work plan entirely and just have all 25 here. But they have to have at least the number of VSYs indicated in Appendix A associated with outputs and outcomes. All right, I know that that's a lot of information. Again, look at Appendix B and I'll show you where that is to help sort through these things because it's got that information and much more. We also covered it in some more depth in our prior 2 webinars, and the recordings for that will be available soon. Once you've filled out all those fields, you'll see this dashboard. This is just some helpful information maybe. What's really important is you're going to click Validate Performance Measures, and that's just going to check to make sure that you've filled out all of the fields you need to fill out. Note that that's not checking to make sure that you've got the right number of VSYs for your opportunity. It's not necessarily checking your math. It's just making sure that you've filled out all the fields you need to fill out. So you'll go ahead and click that, and then when you're done, you'll click Back to eGrants Application to get back to the main body of the application. So you can see how that's kind of built, how that's kind of constructed, and not really just a free-form written narrative, The next part of the application is the required documents section. This is really just kind of like a checklist because you're actually going to send your required documents to the email address that you see on the screen right now. You're not going to attach anything to this in eGrants. It's actually not a capability that's available to you. But as you send things in, you're going to track them here. You're going to track them using this. The grant application instructions provide more information about all of these, including when they may or may not be applicable. Next up is the budget. As you can see, when you're working in the eGrants budget area, sometimes you're going to be able to add a whole new budget line. Other times, there are going to be lines that are pre-populated for you, and you'll just be editing it. So this is how you'll make your budget. We're not going to go through every line in the budget, but I did want to focus in on our stipend section. Hopefully, all of you by this point are aware that volunteers who fall within 200% of the poverty level in their state can receive a stipend of $2.65 for their service. Now, this is actually going to come pre-populated. When you look at our stipends, we're in our stipend area of the budget, you'll see that it comes with this annual stipend of $2,767. Can anybody in the chat box guess where that number comes from? What does that $2,767 mean? If you're not sure, try dividing it by $2.65. All right, for the sake of time, I'll give you guys the answer. Hours. Okay, Karen got it. Hours, right. If you divide $2,767 by $2.65, which is the current stipend level, you'll get 1,044 hours. 1,044 hours is 1 VSY. 1 VSY, right? 1,044 hours of service is 1 VSY. If you multiply that by $2.65, it equals this amount. What all this means is we count hours, we count your stipend dollars in terms of VSYs. And so when you go to fill this out, actually, and you click this edit button, it's going to ask you to put in numbers of VSYs instead of just pure dollar amounts. And it'll do the conversion for you. It'll ask you to put in numbers of VSYs, and it'll convert that to dollar amounts for you. The number of VSYs you put in at this stage should equal the number of VSYs you put in your national performance measure stage, because they should be equivalent. I told you we talk about VSYs. All right, so that's the budget section. Next, we'll ask for some information about how you intend to fund the project, including the applicant share of the project. All applications must have at least 10% of the total project cost coming from the applicant. We're going to go a little bit fast here. We're kind of in the home stretch. We've covered most of the most difficult information. I haven't actually seen any questions come in, so if you have any, now would be a great time to get them in there, get them queued up, because you actually will not need to complete the station roster for new applications. We just added that to the FAQs, or we're in the process of adding that to the FAQs. So if you don't see that there, it will be there shortly, but you don't actually need to provide a station roster for a new application. And then you'll have an opportunity to review what you put in. And finally, the authorized representative will be able to authorize it. Again, it doesn't need to be the authorized representative that actually finishes this process, because they are the ones who are able to bind your organization contractually. So they need to finish this process. They'll do that by putting in "I agree" right there. And then the application is submitted. I know that's a lot. I want to do a couple of things here. So first thing we're going to do, well, first thing I'm going to do anyway, is give you all another invitation to put questions in the chat box. We've got about 15 minutes left. I haven't seen any questions yet, so please go ahead and put any questions you might have in the chat box. While you formulate questions, I'm also going to go navigate to our competition page and show you some of the resources that we talked about. While I do that, Courtney, if you have any additions or clarifications or anything else you want to add, go ahead and jump in while I get us to the competition webpage.
I don't really have anything to add, but I will just say that on the competition webpage there, all of these resources are there, so if you don't remember anything after this call, you can always go to the webpage and take a look and get all of the information you would need for completing your application.
Great, thanks, Courtney. And yeah, so let's take a look at this. As you can see, we already saw a screenshot that looked like this. You know, we've got one section for the foster grandparent program, one section for the senior companion program. The eGrants information, right, that step-by-step walkthrough, that's in this document. As it turns out, it's actually the same document for both programs, so you can follow either link. We post it in both places just to make it convenient so you can see all the information together, but it is the same document for both programs. And that gives you that step-by-step walkthrough that this has been an abbreviated version of. Also gives you more information about what we're looking for in specific questions, things like that. Also, where you can find more information about those required documents, the real star of the show today. We also talked a little bit about our performance measure instructions. That is where you can go to learn more about work plans, outputs, outcomes, VSYs, those kinds of topics. That's going to be described in the performance measure instructions. Final resource I want to highlight here, actually I'll highlight two more resources. These work plan development worksheets. Remember, that's the part of the application that is constructed rather than written. And so you need to go to that having a pretty good idea, being almost certain what you're going to put in before you ever get there. And the worksheets will help you do that. The worksheets will help you do that. And then the last thing that I want to highlight while we're here is actually if we scroll down just a little bit more, down here we've got some frequently asked questions. And those are very handy. Courtney is updating those whenever we think there's something that needs to be added. So please do pay attention to those. Okay. I am going to switch back to our deck for a minute. All right. I see the one question that we've got from, it looks like LaShonda. If there are multiple counties in one state, are they sharing the funding in VSYs? So LaShonda, I'm going to try to answer your question. I'll ask Courtney to jump in if I'm not being clear enough. When you look at Appendix A, and we can actually go back to that, here we go. Each one of these is one opportunity, and CNCS will make one grant for one opportunity. So one organization is going to apply for this amount of money. They need to commit to provide this amount of minimum volunteer service years to serve this area. And then one organization will be the recipient of that grant, that whole package deal, right? It's a package deal. Each one of these rows in Appendix A sort of all comes together. Courtney, do you think I articulated that well? Anything to add to that?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay. Maddie asks, is an average budget available? An average budget is not available, unfortunately. You know, every program is different. So in the eGrants system, there are some guides to help you navigate through there, but there are no sample budgets available. All right, I don't see any other questions right now. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to check our knowledge with some polls and just see if we are following along. All right, take a minute to answer this first poll. By the way, we're going to continue to answer questions while they come. So take this time to ask any questions you haven't yet. Go ahead and put them in the chat box. But while you do that, check your knowledge using the polls that we've got here. While we work on this first one, Joanne has asked, we are still using the 75%, 25%, correct, for outcomes. So for those of you who don't know, a few years ago, Senior Corps used these percentages for the amount of service that must be placed in work plans that have outcomes. Joanne, we are no longer using those, so you don't need to worry about those percentages at all. That's actually what you see on that dashboard in eGrants, but they're not really relevant anymore. Instead, the key number to really pay attention to is these volunteer service years. That's the key number to pay attention to, because you need to put at least this number of volunteer service years in work plans that result in outcomes. Anything above that, you can put into other community priorities, or if you're in the foster grandparent program, into some other work plans, I should say. So I should actually be a little bit more specific here. So for the foster grandparent program, you need to put these in education outcomes specifically. And for the senior companion program, you're going to need to put them in healthy futures and aging in place. Again, if those words don't mean a lot to you, you're going to want to go to Appendix B to the to the notice of funding opportunity. Looks like we all were able to answer our question about the application timing. I am glad to hear that. If I've communicated nothing else over the course of these 4 webinars, I hope I have been able to communicate that. We've got a couple more here. While we go through these knowledge check questions, please continue to ask questions in the chat box. The tool that you can use to plan your work plans before entering them into eGrants is called the Electronic Grants Management System, a budget, a calculator, or the work plan development worksheets. Okay, we've got a handful of answers here. I'm going to give you one last call. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's see our results. So the work plan development worksheets are the tool that will let you program or will let you plan things out outside of the Electronic Grants Management System, outside of eGrants. That's what you're going to want to use. So when you get to eGrants, You know what you're doing. Of course, a calculator might be helpful in the course of that process too. These next two are going to be a little bit tougher, and I think are kind of your graduate level questions. So we'll see who gets them. If you have any technical issues, you should attempt to solve them on your own for as long as possible. Move on to other parts of your application and return to them at the application deadline, or contact the National Service Hotline using the information provided in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. All right, looks like the answers we've gotten are all trending in the same direction, so I'm going to wrap this one up. Share the results out. Right, contact the National Service Hotline. The key thing here is to not wait to return to it at the application deadline. Usually the technology problems are not just going to go away on their own, so if you run into one, take immediate steps to address it. All right, this is the hardest question, and if you get this question right, you have graduated from FGP SCP competition prep with flying colors. A VSY is, and you can choose more than one answer here. Is it 1,044 stipended hours? Is it $2,767? Is it assumed to be equivalent to unduplicated volunteers when you enter your work plans? Or is it what you will look at in Appendix A to determine the minimum amount of service required for a particular service area? You can choose more than one answer. Hint, hint, you can choose more than one answer. Okay, I see I've got a question from Jay. Where are the work plan development worksheets located? And also I've got a question from Scott. Remind us where we can access this instructional webinar. The answer to both of those is the same. I'm going to paste the URL into the chat box right now. It is what we've been calling the competition website. Sometimes we call it the competition headquarters, same thing. That is where you can get the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That is where you can get Appendix B that has information about performance measures. That is where you can get the grant application instructions that walk through the system. That is where you can get the work plan development worksheets, and that is where these recordings will be posted next week. All of it at that website. That is your home base. Okay. So the answer to this question is all of these things. All of them are different ways of thinking about VSYs or volunteer service years. Kind of definitionally, at its most basic level, it is 1,044 stipended hours, right? The example I've used in other webinars is you've got 16 ounces in a pound, you've got 1,044 stipended hours in a volunteer service year. As we make that just a little bit more complicated, though, we know the stipends right now are set to $2.65. Well, if we know that stipends are set at $2.65, and we're talking about 1,044 stipended hours, we can get the value of that just by multiplying those two things together. And that's that $2,767 number. That's what you'll see in eGrants when you go to enter in your stipend. It's going to have that amount. It wants you to count your VSYs, not just put in the total amounts. When you're putting in your work plans, that's what you're going to assume is equivalent to unduplicated volunteers. You're not going to see the term VSY in your work plan area in eGrants. Instead, you're going to see unduplicated volunteers, and you should assume that those are equivalent to your VSYs, even though we know that won't always be the case in practice. And finally, that's got to be the amount, or you have to provide at least the number of those volunteer service years that you see in Appendix A for your particular opportunities. Compliant to this Washington opportunity, it's 20. This Utah opportunity, it's 13. And if I went to the FGP Appendix A, I would see a whole different set of service areas and volunteer service years associated with them. As we look at the answers there, it looks like we all tracked that first one, but a little less confidence in the later questions. They're actually all different ways of thinking about volunteer service years. All right. The last set of questions that we're going to see here is actually just an invitation to let us know how we did. We've got about 2 minutes left. I think we could take one more question if it came in. While we wait to see if another question comes in, please do take this simple satisfaction survey. Let us know how we're doing. Courtney, any final thoughts here as we come down towards the end of not just this webinar, but this series of webinars?
Just a reminder, if you have any questions or anything that comes up that you can't find on the website, you can always email us at the 2020 FGP-SCP@cns.gov mailbox, and we'll get back to you with an answer.
Great. Thank you very much, Courtney. Great reminder. I did see a question from Scott come in. Can you show us those last survey results again briefly? If you want to hang around for a couple minutes after the end of the webinar, let's say I'm on Central Time 3:32 or 2 minutes past the top of the half hour, I can pull them up again. Unfortunately, I can only do one poll at a time, and we do want to make sure that we get these satisfaction survey results. So we're going to leave these up here for now, but if you want to stick around for just a couple minutes afterwards, I will pull those up. All right, I haven't seen any other questions come in, so I'll just take this final opportunity to thank all of you for coming and learning alongside us, to thank you for your interest in these opportunities. This was not our most exciting webinar, I recognize, but trust me when I say we are excited by these opportunities. If you were able to attend some of our other webinars, hopefully that came through. We are so grateful for your interest. For those of you who are senior core grantees, we're grateful for all that you've done to build these programs up. And for those of you who are new to the community, we're grateful for your excitement about national service. Good luck in the application process. We really hope to see some strong applications, and I have no doubt that we will. With that, we will be signing off. Thank you one last time. Please take a minute to fill out the satisfaction survey if you haven't already. And to Scott, who was looking for those last survey results, just hang on a couple minutes after the top of the half hour and we'll pull those up. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good one and good luck.